If you listen to the Emergence story from each pueblo, it's very similar, but we tell it where we emerged from somewhere up north. It came from Mesa Verde to Aztec to Chaco Canyon. The people were told that wherever you go, you yell out Haaku'me, Haaku'me 4 times until they get the response back. So this is where they settled.
Haak'ume means a place prepared.
This is a replacement of the original tourist and visitor center that was housed on the same footprint. That structure was lost to a fire in 2000. So it presented that opportunity for us to rethink tourism and engage the cultural preservation and language preservation initiatives into this particular project. We wanted the building to represent the architectural history of our people. So from Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon and Aztec, a place called Haak'ume, or the Moss Ruins, to this settlement, and then going back to the newer villages of Acoma and McCarty's, as well as the mission churches, and taking elements from those buildings and incorporating them in some way into this facility. So there was a list, and fortunately enough, Barbara and her team had visited a lot of these ancestral sites, so they were familiar.
Our list was parts and pieces, so we had the alphabet. What the tribe had was the language to put all of those pieces together. I'd probably been to Acoma 6 times. I mean, there just was something really magical about it. One of the really interesting things about the architecture here at Acoma specifically is the Kivas are square or rectangular versus round, and they're actually part of the housing block. And so one of the things we did in the proposal was to take that and build upon it. And so we thought we're going to build a rectangular box out of steel, and similar to how you enter a Kiva from the top, you actually had to put your hand into the box and open up the leaves to get to the information inside. We had no idea if that would be sacred, offensive, appalling, welcomed, but it was our way of starting to tell the story of making sure they understood we were really telling the story of Acoma and not anyone else's.
We were asked by the Tribal Council to consider other sites away from Old Acoma. The community reiterated how important it would be for the cultural center to maintain its place below the mesa. It would bring people home. And the building ultimately represents this grand house that the Acoma people all share and that we open up to visitors.
We always talked about sustainability as an economic sustainment of the community, a cultural sustainment of the community.
We constantly are praying for moisture and that the environment will be in good health. And while we have naturally formed water cisterns on the mesa top, I mean, clearly those are cultural resources and they're there for a purpose. Our elders really just were not buying the idea of capturing the water and that it needed to flow naturally in any direction to feed the landscape. There are all sorts of design elements that are sustainable elements in terms of construction. We wanted to make for sure that we were utilizing materials that were environmentally appropriate. The design team really stepped forward to educate us on the types of systems and materials and just the design piece. How do we place this new facility within the space and take the most advantage of natural light, the winds, and the water resources that are available. You know, at the end of that, hopefully having a building that was complementary to the cultural and natural landscape.
In the interview, we talked a lot about how you get somebody from a different culture who's coming off of the freeway going, 80 miles an hour to 50 miles an hour to 30 miles an hour into this completely different landscape, into a different culture, and you, on some level, actually have to help that person kind of wipe their brain clean and be open to things.
That trek into the valley, coming into the building and the site represents that migration. The place, Haak'ume, was prepared for our eternal occupation. It is something that is very, very sacred in terms of making that connection from our place of emergence to Acoma.
We wanted people to come into the north side where it was more closed off and the big heavy door. So you actually had to physically interact with the building.
You walk into the building and the first thing you see in the background is Acoma. So you come home. It also gives us the opportunity to see the natural landscape, to see Acoma on the south side, Enchanted Mesa to the east. And then north you see the nice rock formations in the valley and our northern sacred mountain, Mount Taylor. Out west you see some of our sacred lands and also the agricultural fields that are still used today.
If you come in from the north, from the vista point, you look through here, and it doesn't just stand out. It blends in with the surroundings, and the color is camouflaged into the terrain here. But when you get close, you start seeing it.
There's, I believe, 6 different colors of stucco on the building. The colors that are found on the Pueblo, including the purple. It's a lot of subtlety that we talked about with the community in terms of how do we bring that outside in, inside out. This is a large building. 40,000 square feet is the size of a warehouse. That's a big building, and the houses up on top of Acoma are all small and unique, and then they're in apartment blocks which become larger buildings.
The first floor was nothing but storage, so nobody lived on the first floor. And then the second floor was kind of like a kitchen living area, third floor quarters.
They're split by thin alleyways, which we call slots, because that's also what you see in the landscape. So when you look up at the mesa, you see the rock pieces, they're kind of peeling away and you've got that slot. And so that was a very subtle way of being able to take the building, break it up into smaller pieces so it didn't actually feel like a warehouse.
At nighttime, the Milky Way goes right down the middle of this pueblo here, and you can just see all the billions of stars. You look up and Milky Way is right there, and the constellations.
When you go into that museum, that whole idea of that slot with the mica is you've got that diffuse light, you've got the cloud pattern that's kind of running up and through.
So basically, you have the whole universe from east to west. Through the middle here, you see these little lights replicating stars. So you have the sky, and then east-west are traveling off the sun.
Our people back in the day, they knew how to situate the houses to where the sunlight comes in through it during winter time, and see it coming through right now. And then summertime, the sun doesn't even come through the windows at all.
We were always interested in doing something that had modern materials, older materials, because if you go up onto the old mesa, all of those materials are there. There's steel windows, there's wood windows, there's stone. That language, that vocabulary already exists. When we went to talk with the community's members and the different focus groups, we had the box, the 6 important building blocks. Stone.
Yauni. That's what rock means.
Corn.
Yaga, corn.
Mud,
Yashpatui, mud. Yashpatui.
mica,
The word for mica is hashkani,
wood,
goods, wood.
pottery.
Dyuni. Dyuni is pottery.
Back when our elders grew up, they shared a meal out of one bowl, and that was togetherness, to keep your family together, to keep you tightly bonded on the floor.
Together. I remember my grandmother, we would go to her sister. Well, we call each other sisters, and even though we're not the same clan, but everybody's your sister or your brother, we would go eat with the other ladies and then make potteries or bead. They would all sit around and laugh and talk and eat.
She showed me how to sew. She showed me how to crochet. She showed me how to can peaches, apples. There's so much that I learned from them.
Even medicines, you know, a lot of the plants, it's used for medicine.
Your
Yeah, my grandmother.
was a medicine lady.
Yeah, and so I know a lot of the plants that's good for you.
When the sun rose, then you go out to pray. Same thing at night. When the sun's going down, you go out and pray. That was one thing my grandparents always did. And it was a blessing for me now that I look at it, you know.
It's my grandmother, Marie. Yes, when I'm making the pottery or when I go walking in the valley, I'll go hiking and I can feel her spirit. I'm glad we're still here. We still have our ceremonies. It's a time for our people to celebrate and be together, pray together. I mean, we pray for the world. It's not just for our pueblo, it's for the whole world.
The name of the upstairs conference room is Kutia Munishkaya, which is the home of the ancestors. This is a really nice example of truly Acoma architectural design of a Kiva fireplace. And you'll find these in most of the original house blocks on top of the mesa. You know, women would traditionally be cooking food. So usually there will be a dough bowl or water or cooking pots that will sit along the banco.
Historically, the chimneys would have been made out of also the old pottery. That was kind of their original fire brick. And so you'll see some handmade pottery up on top of the fireplace chimney, kind of as a nod to that tradition.
There's a lot that goes into pottery making. I appreciate that I learned that from my grandparents. The thing that I've carried on the most is the praying and carrying on the pottery, the art. Her mother and her mother's mother were also potters. So she learned from her mother and then her mother learned from her mother. And then the everyday chores were get up, go pray, go after water at the windmill over here, bring them back, heat it up, get the wash tub out, wash whatever was dirty from the day before. After you did all that, you put beans on the stove so it can start cooking for dinner. You go outside and you pick the chili and the cilantro, and you come inside, you clean them up, and then after all that, you're so exhausted. Okay, sit down here, help me grind my clay. So you have to grind clay or make her paint, and then you finally get to put your hands in the clay. My grandfather and I would go mine the clay and walk all the way back there with me to show me where to get the paints. You know, different colors. He said, you get this color here. You get this color here. My husband's grinding clay right now. It's got to be sun-dried first, and then you soak it in rainwater. Has to be rainwater, not tap water. The tap water has too much alkali in it. Dry it on the ground on a sheet. All the water absorbs into the ground. and then you kind of stir it, and it forms like little cottage cheese. You soak it again, and then it forms smaller, you know, like curds. And then that's when you grind it on the metate. It's ground to the consistency of flour, then I sift it through a screen. I do the pottery shards the same way. I soak them for like 3-4 days, and then you grind them on the metate.
Acoma pottery is the only pottery that you can store water in it because of the temper that's in the clay.
It takes a lot of patience to do a pot. Okay, when
It
you're
does.
forming it, the pinch pots are really easy. Of course, you just use your fingers and then trim the top of the knife. But when you're doing the coil pots, it takes a lot of time and patience. That's what my grandson found out. He wanted to do the whole pot at one time. You have to put it in a dish, let the bottom get firm. And then we use these when we're building pots. We'll put the raw clay in it and build the pot from this. We call them huditsi here. Huditsi. You make your rolls, then you attach them. But you gotta make sure you don't have any air bubbles, because the thing will explode. You build it up inside, not the outside, and let it get firm again. Then you put the top on the same way, and then you make that little curve there.
Right.
And then you let it dry again, and then you trim the top. Then you trim the axis all the way around the pot, as thin as you want. Trim it down with that skull can lids. Used to be corned beef. Corned beef or Spam. You can't use Spam nowadays. They have the flip top now.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what my grandmother used. You get the pumice stones, and then you smooth it all out while it's still wet. You polish it with your hand with the slip, and then you let it dry. Once it's dry, you do not put water back on it, otherwise they'll crack. There's the yellow, the red, and then the white slip that we put on. The white slip, I guess, to me serves as a primer. Yeah, and it takes on the paint really well.
The hematite.
Yeah. Do the iron oxide or the hematite stone that's found in the riverbeds. You grind that on a harder piece of stone, and I was so fortunate my grandmother gave me that when she couldn't pot anymore. I was done with my chores, I would make her paint. That takes a lot of time. And then see, these are the yaka. This is the paintbrush I'll be using to paint all the detailed lines. If you want it real fine, if you want it thicker, then you have to chew the end of it to get the little tiny fiber. The fiber is really then soft and pliable to paint. It's nice to finish one whole pot using the same paintbrush. So I was commissioned to fill that little space. He asked me to build a storyteller. When I did my large sculpture right there, my husband, he made paint for 2 days to do the black pants. And when you do a large piece like that, you have to have enough black to cover the whole thing. It never matches. These are Thunderbird, and the lines is rain. That represents rain, and there's the rainbow all through the pot. We call them Thunderbirds. They're swallows. Yeah, you see them coming through, and I know, oh, okay, it's going to rain. I have some up here, my grandmother's pottery. She used to do a lot of vases and big pots. This was the first corn maid my daughter made, so she did a good job on it. I'm teaching my granddaughters now. They make tiny little pots.
As we were developing the community engagement piece, we still wanted to offer opportunities to our community to become involved in the interior design of the spaces. And one of the projects that we sponsored was a tile painting project for Acoma children. Each of them are signed, and most of them, I believe, were second, third, and fourth grade students. We're very fortunate that we have the facilities to showcase pieces from our own collection, and we also now have the opportunity to bring collections from major institutions from throughout the country. And this particular exhibition features one of the rarest collection of historic Acoma pottery.
Lucy Lewis is one of the matriarchs of the pottery making tradition here in Acoma, and she was very well known for her fine line in black on white ware. And what we did is actually take a look at one of her pots, and we took that design and then had it sandblasted onto the glass. So one of the subtle pieces, and it's really throughout the building, the triangle pattern. It's on the sidewalk, it's on the signage, outside on the grates in the courtyard. It's running the whole way up around the window and skylight portion of the museum. And that's a pottery pattern. Again, for the folks at Acoma, it tells a different story. It's that respect for the earth and rain and paying homage to the rain.
You'll see on those ladders, they kind of tend to face north. Across the top on one of the major Kiva is a cloud. The poles themselves are kind of sharpened at the tips as to pierce the cloud to bring rain.
We only tell stories during the winter. We don't tell it during the summer.
I remember my grandfather, that's when he told our stories, during winter months when it was boring, like, what do? Go to bed early? And I was always remembering that too when I make my storyteller figurines, how my grandfather sat there or they would sing to us. They would sing songs to us or, the stories. My dad was the last one to tell stories to to me and my siblings. But as far as that, I think that's where it ended.
When we first opened, we had storytelling in the evening, and we had the fireplace going. We served parched corn, piñons, and Indian tea. And first night, a lot of students came. And it was so funny. We thought they would be afraid to tell, stories. And they were the main ones. I want to tell a story. They were coyote stories and different animal stories. So then I guess the elders heard about it. So the next time we had it, it was the elders that came and they started telling the stories. So it was so much fun. Now I'm trying to tell my son. The other day at breakfast, I said, okay, it's still winter. I can tell you this little folk tale over breakfast. So I was telling him about the boy and the eagle. But I would love to record them and then maybe during winter time, have the children listen to them. And I think that's another way of remembering those folk tales or stories about the land, the animals, how we lived together with the animals, and then also the plants.
So when you look at the layout of the cultural center courtyard or plaza, you're also getting a sense of what it looks like up on top.
The east and west sides protect from the wind, and so the north side's enclosed. We live in such a great solar climate. The south side of the building is warming up. It's a thermal mass, and then we've got the windows to let the light in.
Most of the time we have traditional Acoma dances that are performed.
They're dancing in deerskin moccasins, so screening the soil in order to remove pebbles and gravel was really important.
From the plaza, you can get a feel for some of the other architectural details and commissioned work that was awarded to tribal members. You can see the pottery chimneys, the Kiva ladders, the parapets, the carved beams, and the monumental sculpture.
If you go up on top of the mesa, you've got the mud roofs, and at some point when tar paper started coming in, then they used rocks to put up on top of the tar paper. On the entry and on this south wall are those rocks. The building has a mix of canales, and part of that was the idea of pulling together the different historical styles that would have been used. Today we're seeing the archaeological ruins or the building at Mesa Verde in Chaco Canyon. as exposed stone, but they would have actually had mud plaster on both the exterior and the interior. And so one of the things we wanted to do in the building is have a design way of kind of showing the Acoma people past, present, and future. And so that whole idea of the building has started before them. It's going to be here long after us. So this idea of having the exposed stone and partially the plaster covering it is kind of a nod back to Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. Chaco Canyon has corner windows. The mica would have been used in historic windows, and then the stair, and historically there would have been logs that were used and hand-hewn, and so these are full-size logs. We've got the round vigas, which would have been more of the Native American influence, and then you've got kind of the square hewn, which would have been more of the Spanish influence.
These pivoting doors, you see it when you enter the building, the large wooden door, which is actually modeled after the entry door into the historic mission at the Mesa top. These original carved pine doors here in the old mission, they've never been replaced, so it's pretty incredible that they've survived this many years. Here at the museum, we have this very large steel door. Others in the building mimic that idea of the pivoting.
The rock in Chaco Canyon have actually very low side pieces, and our initial designs had those. Some of the folks on the design committee for the tribe kind of chuckled and said, well, those aren't Acoma doors. Acoma doors have a high T, and that was a place to actually hide and put the seed pots during the fall and winter, so the rodents would have less opportunity to get into the seeds. There are a number of carved doors based on old traditional weaving and embroidery patterns, so the women's manta clothing designs.
And in here, where we show our introductory film, is a replicated room from the mission church, San Esteban.
And the tribe talked to us about the original design. They wanted the building to feel like it was a house. And if you go up into the old houses, some of them 200 years old, and what's happened is where you had adobe, the adobe slumped at the bottom. It's just continued to plaster over the edges, and so the building is kind of growing with time. All of the walls that aren't stone are whitewashed. And the great thing about whitewash is it's a living, interactive, tactile thing. They chalked, which is also a somewhat normal part of whitewash. And so as people would go through the building or lean against the building or sit on a bench or touch something, they would have chalk, which kind of actually drove some of the management of the building crazy because nobody wants their visitors to be unhappy. I loved that aspect because it meant the building was touching them back, and there was something that was interacting and they were leaving with, even if they didn't know they were really doing that.
Like there's a booger that comes out your nose, we'll cut away, it'll be fine. Sounds good to me. Okay.
Miscalculation on the length, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
Barbara Felix, queen. Not true.
The completion was complete. I mean, sorry.
Cut.